Hey everyone, welcome to conversation number 25 of the Kristof Lewis podcast. I'm really glad you're here. Just as always, I have a special guest today. But before we get to that, we are on Spotify now, as well as iTunes, Podbean for Android users, and of course, YouTube. My guest today is a longtime friend. I've actually known him, I believe, since I was in the single digits, so probably like 9, maybe 10 years old. We were really good friends growing up, and then we separated ways, and then recently we started talking again when we went hiking in Colorado, as some of you have seen. He is a chemistry teacher, cross-country and track coach, amateur adventurer. He is everything above. He does a lot of fun stuff. He's a great guy, super articulate, super smart, way smarter than me. I can't wait to talk to him, just as every single guest I have on here. Again, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. The goal of this podcast is to spread the word that positivity and hard work are still tangible things in this world, and that you don't have to do what you don't want to do in life. When it comes to a career, when it comes to whatever you're doing, who you choose to spend your time with, you have control. Some things we don't have control of, many things we do have control of. So it's time to stop sitting on your butt and actually take life by the reins and do something about it. If you don't like your job, if you don't like where you're going to school, if you don't like school in general, don't do it. Do something you want to do, but you cannot sit there and complain about your circumstance if you're not willing to get up and do something about it. So this podcast is with as many people as I can possibly show you that have gone out there, maybe have not liked what they've done originally, and then converted and found something that they've loved to do, and then in the meantime shown other people how to do that themselves. If you have any questions ever, you can find me on Instagram at Kristof Lewis. You can direct message me, and I would love to strike up a conversation with you and help you out. You just let me know. So without further ado, Jordan Olson is our guest. I'm really excited to finally have you on here. As I mentioned in the intro, I know we obviously were friends for quite a long time, with the better part of, I'd say, 2 decades now, and we kind of separated ways, and we met up in Colorado a few months ago, which was awesome. Went on an epic hike up at the Craigs for anybody that's local there. Very fun and absolutely gorgeous hike with 360 views, and we just shared a little bit more about ourselves, caught up, and I was absolutely, again, so happy to hear what was going on in your life and to see that we still share, even in our old age,
right? Yeah.
our mindset of still enjoying life and helping others enjoy life if they maybe are having a difficult time, and just still doing what we enjoy. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
No problem. It was so fun to reconnect just 6-8 weeks ago, and when we were hiking and talking, and you were telling me about this whole thing, and it just, to me, it felt like, having a conversation just like we were having on that hike, to be able to kind of revisit some of those ideas, and in a conversational type of way, where I think, a lot of podcasts are great, but it becomes an interview more than it does a conversation.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that real value and people's ideas and their real, what they truly think, just comes out through conversation, and that's so cool. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Thank you. And that's, and I've said it a lot of times, and that's one of the many reasons that I've wanted to do this podcast, is because ways that I love learning in a multitude of avenues, but one of the ways I enjoy thoroughly, at least as a listener or a viewer, is listening to people that are having a conversation, right? So I've never been a huge fan. I've never subscribed to the interview that you had described there, with somebody having this preset notion, or I have these 5 questions I have to ask him or I have to ask her no matter what, and I'm going to drive the conversation that way. So open-ended, organic speech like this really leads any way at all. So it's really cool, and I'm glad you're a part of it, man.
Absolutely, yeah. Like you said, it's if you have something that you feel like you have to ask beforehand or have to talk about, you really kind of box everything in and leave it there. And I think
exactly
more is learned when we're just kind of shooting it together. And and having fun with it. So
Absolutely. So for people that don't know you, I said in the introduction again, you're a teacher and track, and I mentioned everything we had talked about preemptively. But go ahead and just so people know who you are. Who are you? What's your background? How did you come into what you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. So I am a high school chemistry teacher and a high school girls track and cross country coach. I kind of got started with both of those things a long time ago, I guess, if you really want to trace it way back. My dad now teaches science. He's been a teacher since his whole career, taught health and physical education and science and a few different things. My mom is now a special ed teacher. She was a social worker to start when we were younger, but now she's ventured into the teaching realm as well. So I guess, teaching kind of runs in the family in that way. Yeah. Although I never saw myself as a teacher when I was growing up. Yeah. I don't really know what I saw myself as. I think I thought more highly of myself then than I probably should have, and I thought that I would be some crazy doctor or attorney or pharmacist, and I thought those were like callings that only the best people did. And it wasn't until I went off to college when I started to kind of reconsider what it meant to have an impact. And I felt like I had a lot of great teachers and coaches and people who kind of spoke into my life that way. That's kind of when I started to turn myself more towards that avenue. And why did I choose science? People ask me that a lot, and I don't really know the answer to that. I was actually probably a better student in high school when it came to, English and reading and history and that kind of stuff. Not that I was a bad science or math student. I enjoyed it, but I don't know. Maybe it was a challenge, or maybe it was some of the teachers I had. But I kind of just went down that route, and I still enjoy those other things. I love to read. I love to learn about history and all that stuff. But I guess I just kind of chose science and went with it, and it's worked out well for that.
Yeah, it's interesting how we evolve into things like that. We envision ourselves. I know my entire life, and I probably can speak for most people in this world, they see themselves as something, and they think that this is what they're going to evolve into. That's their chosen path. And we were talking about conversationally being trapped into something that you lock yourself into, but you kept your options open. You didn't see yourself going down this avenue, and you surely did trek down that avenue in such a manner to where you didn't really know what you were doing, or what you wanted to do per se.
Right.
You didn't think you were going to go down this path, but here you are, and it's funny because I'm the same way in the sense of I enjoyed all the subjects that you said you enjoyed as well. I think that's that type of person, and I wasn't good at math or science or anything like that, probably because I didn't enjoy it very much, and I enjoyed history and I enjoyed reading, things that I still very much enjoy today. So from my point of view, it is actually interesting hearing that you got into science. Obviously you have some interest in it.
Sure.
And later in my life, now I absolutely love science and anything that comes underneath that. But I think the way it was given to me in school, I didn't really subscribe to it. So again, to me, it's actually honestly interesting that you went down that way, but here you are.
Yeah. It's, I've asked myself before, why science? And I think there's probably a multitude of reasons. I knew at the time when it was my sophomore year or the end of my freshman year in college, when I really was kind of said, okay, this is the path I'm going to take.
Yeah.
And I knew at that time that math and science teachers were in much more demand than English and history teachers. And I think that was part of it.
Sure.
It was not like I was like, oh my gosh, I hate science, but that's where the jobs are. It was kind of like, well, I like a lot of things, so let's think about it at the next level. What is going to give me good opportunities.
Sure.
And kind of bringing in the rest of me to the whole thing. I was a cross country and track athlete at the University of Akron for the whole 5 years I was there, and I knew that I did not want to let that passion go.
Sure.
And I knew that I wanted to coach, and so I thought, well, what's going to give me the best opportunity to jump into the school system and be able to teach, be able to interact with kids all day long, and then be able to coach too. And so that was, I think, a large part of it. But like I said, my dad was a science teacher and probably is a science teacher. And probably my favorite high school teacher of all time was my chemistry and physics teacher. So
there you go.
Those connections, the connections that you make with people are so long lasting that it just, you don't even realize how much it impacts your life until, these little tidbits keep kind of, even right now, I'm just thinking about, how impactful some of those people are.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild how things impact you at such a level. Retrospectively, when you're looking back now, it's so easy to see, but at the time, you may be experiencing things and you have no idea how they're going to come up later in your life. It's very neat.
Yeah, it's one of those. And there are even people that I look back now and think, I don't know if I took them for granted, or in some case I probably didn't even treat them that well. And now I think, wow, they really meant something to me.
Sure, yeah.
And I wish I could tell them that in a way that was meaningful, because and I still can, but I just I hope that I'm receptive to those types of things as I continue to realize them.
Yeah, and I think those are good points, and I think that I look back and I'm thinking right now as you say that, and there are certain people that I wish I could have maybe treated better, and I just didn't know who I was at the time. I know that may sound cheesy, and I'm still trying to figure out who I am, and I'm okay with saying that. But I was a lot more selfish, self-centered, and I really only cared about myself. But the way I look back at that is, maybe if you can reach out to them. I mean, that might give you some closure, and they might and probably will really appreciate that. Maybe they won't. I don't know.
Sure.
But at least when I come to things in my life that I wish I had done in the past, then I just go, well, I probably can't change that. I mean, maybe you can talk to them in this instance, in this example, but figure out what maybe you did wrong or what you wish you could have done better. And of course, you see where I'm going with this, apply it to the future.
Right.
And then hopefully when you come into new run-ins with people and you have all these new experiences in your life, that you can at least remember where you think you went wrong and apply that to the future.
Yeah. No, I think that's so, I think that's so valuable, because I see it. I think it's probably come to the forefront of my understanding and experiences more so in the last, since I started teaching, because I see kids making the same mistakes that I made.
Yeah.
And obviously they don't look at it in the same way I do, because they haven't kind of gone through everything that I've gone through in terms of like kind of being able to reflect on it in maybe a slightly wiser manner. Not that I'm all that wise, but and so I try to, as much as possible, impart that to kids in some way, help them see that everything they do has an effect in some way. And I don't want to get too much on a soapbox, but I guess that's kind of what we're here for. So what the
absolutely.
heck?
How about it?
One of the things that I'm most frustrated with and concerned about right now is the way that parents, I don't want to say the way that they're parenting, because I don't want to say that they're bad parents, but they try to mow down every problem that their kids ever encounter, and they don't let them struggle. They don't let them fail.
Sure.
And man, I feel so great. I mean, more than anyone else, we talk about being grateful to people that we probably could have treated better, and we could all probably point to our parents. But wow, the way that they raised me, and I at times I thought it was harsh and strict and all these things, but they let me within certain guidelines and within certain bounds. They let me fail at things, and they weren't always there to step in and save the day. And the things I learned from that are just so valuable, and I don't see that as much now as I wish I did.
That's very interesting. And I'm sorry, you said what grade you were teaching?
11th, yeah.
11th
juniors.
grade, yeah.
For
Juniors, yeah. So high school students, of course. It is a very interesting observation, and of course those are, nearly adults. They surely think they're adults. I surely thought I was an adult at that time, and I've mentioned it a million times in my personal life and on this podcast already, and you've just solidified the fact that a lot of the strength comes through resistance, right? If you have a path of least resistance, then you're going to be less adept to dealing with situations when they come up that require a little bit of strength to get through.
Right.
And Honestly, I don't know. Something that comes to my mind right now is that almost creates a boring person in a sense, because they don't really have a story to tell, because they don't have a lot of stories. If you're speaking dramatically, with movies, they're stories that people have come through hardship, right? A lot of people that are very inspirational are able to share their stories because they've gone through something. The last podcast that I put out that aired right before this was about Jen, and Jen, she was able to dramatically shift her life physically and mentally, and now she's helping other people as well. And if she had never endured being able to cut, I think it was like 25% of her weight off, and then being able to understand how to articulate that to others and help that, teach them how to do that, then I wouldn't be having this conversation about her right now. And there's a lot of people that would still maybe be living an unhealthy life. So I just use that as a recent example, that she endured hardship of some degree, and now she has a story as a result of that, and she's able to help other people. And again, this is another point that comes up organically about the show is so many people that I've talked to, and you say yourself, and I can easily speak for myself, there's plenty of times where I ran into resistance and I didn't know what I was doing and I failed, or something didn't work out in my favor. And at the time, it definitely sucked. And the younger I was, the more probably frustrated I was.
Sure.
And I didn't understand maybe why I was experiencing how I was experiencing it, and why my parents weren't allowing me to experience it as I was. Right. But then again, retrospectively, as you're looking back, you're like, oh, obviously you said you see yourself a lot in your students and the students in your school, and you're like, wow, those are the similar or same mistakes that I made. Yeah. And of course, it's easy to say that your parents were kids too, they made the same mistakes, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard it themselves as, I made the same mistake when I was a kid. I didn't want to make, or didn't want to see you make the same mistake. But again, as a kid, you never see that. So I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing quite often, with your students in this manner. They, maybe if you try to tell them what we're speaking about right now, they just might blow it off, because I might very well have blown it off as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too where, I try as best as possible, and I teach a chemistry class that is not at the highest level in the school, so it's not like AP chemistry. It still can be. It's still the state of Ohio still counts it as a course to get your honors diploma with if you want to. So it's an upper level science course, but
okay.
It's, a lot of kids take it that are maybe more interested in arts and reading and history and whatever, but they still want that honors diploma. They're smart kids,
sure,
but they're not math and science, oriented. And so because of that, I do my best not to make it, like the world's best, hardest science class where you're going to become a genius in sciences, but more so in that you're just hopefully going to learn something about yourself, and so the hard part about my class isn't necessarily that we do really hard things in chemistry, but it's for some kids it's hard because if they don't have their homework on the day that I ask for it to be done, then they don't get any credit. There is no half credit for that type of stuff.
Interesting.
If you come late to my class, I'll give you a warning, and then the next time I'm going to give you detention. It's these little things that I think, as you mentioned, they don't understand right now. They think I'm a mean guy sometimes. And that's okay. I'm not there to be their friend necessarily. I enjoy the relationships that I develop with these kids, and a lot of them, regardless of, how well they perform in the class, become friendly with me, and that's okay. But I also set it up in such a way that they can kind of choose to succeed or fail, and it's all based on their choice. And so
that's phenomenal, though. Being able to give people the facts and then having them deduce that themselves, right? You never want to tell them this is right and it's right because I said it's right.
Yeah,
I've always hated that, and that's happened to me before in the past, and I still hate it today. But
sure.
And I like to give another good example of a lot of things that comes up. Obviously, very active now in America is politics, and people just automatically believe the left, or they automatically believe the right because they've only paid attention to that's that wing. Now, what I think one should do, I would hope they would do, not think they should do, but hope they would do, is, you look a little bit over here, to the left, you look a little bit to the right, anything, insert any variable you want here, and then you make your own opinion, or you come up with your own, your own opinion based on that.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because I think you kind of know where I stand politically in most cases. But in the last 3 or 4 years, I've really come to realize that both the left and the right is filled with so many self-righteous people. And I was one of those. And I'm still, and sometimes I still am, and I'm working as best I can. But everyone thinks that they know the answers, and they're not even willing to listen.
Yeah, that's why I was giving that example. Exactly. They think, whatever, and it's not, like I said, just to be clear for anybody watching or listening, I'm not specifically talking about politics only. I mean, it's anything, like you said, people just, they think this is right, and it's right no matter what. Once they subscribe to it, they're never going to turn their head and look another way, and they don't want to hear what you have to say, whatever, they're just 100% right, and you're 100% wrong, and they don't even spark an idea that perhaps they may be right and wrong about a few things, and you may be right or wrong about a few things. It's not, black and white. There's many, many layers of gray in there as well. Yeah.
Well, I have a great example, a great story to tell that, this is 24 hours old. So it's fresh, and it kind of speaks to this, and it's not political at all. But, as a cross-country coach of a girls team with 60 girls on it, invariably you're going to have some that are more committed than others, and we had been running into a problem with some who we perceived weren't putting forth a lot of great effort. They missed some opportunities to compete without some of them missed some opportunities to compete without telling us why they weren't there. Just things that were kind of piling up, and we always, as coaches, we're always addressing, do the best in everything you can do. If it's a warm-up drill, if it's the workout, if it's the lifting, if it's whatever, if it's your stretching, your foam rolling, whatever it is, do the best you can do. And we address these issues like, don't walk the cool down. It's we're doing it for a reason, whether or not you understand it.
Yeah.
And so we finally kind of got to a point where it was like, what, we need to sit some kids down and really talk to them about it. And so long story short, we tried to sit a group of them down. We asked them if they had any input. They didn't say anything. We kicked them off the team. Okay. Fast forward, this was last week. Fast forward a few days. Obviously, we had some irate parents.
Yeah, sure.
So we scheduled some meetings to sit down with these parents, and I was really kind of in this self-righteous mode. I was like, we kicked them off because they deserved it, and you know what? They wouldn't even talk to us about why they were doing these things, and so heck with them. But I would kind of harken back to something I read late last spring, early summer in a book written by a psychologist who I have come to greatly respect. And that each chapter was a rule that you should live by, according to him. And the 9th chapter, or the 9th rule, is assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. And before I had these meetings, I kind of just stumbled upon that idea again. And I thought, I really need to do my best to go into these meetings with an ear to listen and try to perceive the points that these parents have, even though I'm having a hard time grasping some of it. I need to try to open up in that perspective. And I can, it wasn't all, rainbows and butterflies, the meetings, but I can say that when we walked away from these meetings, there were 3 of them that we had, I felt like it was really constructive, because eventually they were able to kind of do the same thing, I think. Yeah. And I was doing the same thing to them, just like, okay, I'm really going to try to hear what you're saying and hear what you think happened, because, gosh, I don't want to pretend like I know it all. Yeah. That's a bad place to be in.
Yeah, so, and people sense that, if you're coming into a meeting like that, hard-headed, thinking that whatever you're about to say is right no matter what, and they're just crazy because their kids didn't speak up and fend for themselves, or say, give you a legitimate reason as to why they were doing something they weren't supposed to do. If you come in like that, I think people are emotional, they can sense emotions from others,
right?
And if you come in like that, they're, I think, automatically, even you may be not even going to say a word,
Right.
And they're gonna know that you're not really gonna bend, and you're not gonna even listen to them. So why should they? It's kind of like when you are in an argument with somebody, and I don't know. I've been in arguments with people where I get very emotional, of course, and you start yelling, and then the other person doesn't even care what the words you are, or what the words you are saying, and they just know that you're yelling. They can hear they're yelling, and they don't like it, so they're automatically just going to tune out what you're saying and yell back. So approaching any situation like that very linearly and just attacking, an attack mode like that, people are going to recognize that, and I think it's not going to give them the opportunity to be able to be heard. And it sounds like you initially went in with the mindset of, you almost didn't even want them to be heard, but you digressed, and you harkened back, like you said, to that rule or that recommendation, and that's a great point. I would actually love to link that book in the description here after the conversation so people can check it out if they are interested. But the fact that you even realized that you were coming in so hard-nosed and head-first,
right,
and you were able to do that, I think that's a huge step in being able to come to terms with yourself in that sense. And that can be really hard for people to even accept that maybe they are coming in that way, and to be able to reel themselves back before going into an emotionally charged situation like you did.
Yeah, it was, like I said, I'm still working on myself in that whole manner, because my natural inclination, my natural bent is to be pretty combative and pretty argumentative, and
there's pros and cons to that.
Yeah, and man, I was a real butthole at times 6, 8, 10 years ago when I thought I had all the answers, and like you said, no one's listening to you. I've won a lot of arguments just by doing exactly what you're saying. I talk fast and I raise my voice, and people are like kind of shut down. I'm like, yeah, I won that. I won what?
Yeah.
What did I win? It's pointless.
Yeah, and there's I think winning is a very important word there, and I know people joke about it, but it's not necessarily winning. But I think we want to be able to teach each other, and you don't want to just like make yourself known that you are right, and these you want to describe and show that individual or those individuals why you see it this way. Like you said, you wanted to see it, from the parents' point of view, but you also want to be able to set up a scenario where the parents want to see it from your point of view.
Right, exactly. No, that's perfectly put. And I think in just about every case yesterday, that was it really kind of manifested itself that way at the end. I even got an email from one of the parents this morning that said, I really felt like it was constructive. I hope you felt the same way, and thank you for your time. And I can tell you that the emails we had received before that were not in that same light, and nor was my attitude. And so the fact that parties were able to come down across the table from one another and just kind of sit down and hash things out a little bit. Were there some accusations made? Were there things to clear up? Of course.
Yeah.
But it's easy to run from those types of problems, and so to kind of face them head on, and it's just like we were talking about earlier. Yeah, was it comfortable? No, it wasn't. But things that the things that are always comfortable aren't really teaching you anything.
Yeah. I think it sounds like you learned quite a bit from this situation as well, and it sounds like you yourself had an evolution over. You said that the past 4, 6, 8 years of, and that's what it is. And again, I speak towards it a lot, and I would hope that people, this is one of the things that I bring up a lot, that people would take away, is that you want to constantly be improving on yourself, no matter physically, mentally, everything that you've just described. I would hope they would take with them.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things that I think that being honest with ourselves is a lot less rare than we probably realize.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of relate it to, I don't want to get it too spiritual here, because I'm sure you have all kinds of people listening, but as someone who professes to be a Christian and tries to pray to God, and I've realized it just as much in my prayer life. Like, I'm kind of pretending like I have it all together sometimes, even though I'd like to be, asking for help. And so I think that can apply to anything. You might say, hey, I'm seeking help out in this way from this counselor or this friend, but really try to make sure you're being honest with yourself first. That way you can be honest with that person. Otherwise, it's, you're not starting from a good place.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't require to be, have people be honest with you or want them to be honest with you if you can't do it yourself. I mean, how can you? It's just like you're a coach, right? So if you were a coach that was not there repeatedly on time, then or a parent, if you're asking something of your child or for whoever, you cannot ask that if you're not doing it. You have to set the example. So I think you're setting the example within yourself, being able to align yourself. Look within. And you, like I said, you have to align yourself before you look out and demand all these things. I mean, maybe not demand, but ask of these things from the world around you.
Yeah. Well, another great example of that I've kind of that I realized leading into this school year was I really became fed up with the use of technology in my classroom. I kind of thought that 16, 17-year-olds, when I first started teaching, that we could be real enough with one another that I would just say, hey, guys, put your phones away for 45 minutes. We can both be adults in the room, and we can – okay, well, that didn't happen, right? So eventually I was so frustrated with it that I bought a phone holder. So every kid has a number. When they come into my classroom, they put their phone in that slot, and I take attendance that way, and they don't have them for the whole period. But at the end of last year, I realized, well, what about me? Because – I'm still pulling my phone out occasionally to check this or that, and I can go ahead and make the excuse that, well, I need to check work email but they have things that they feel are legitimate as well.
Yeah, a lot of it's perception as well. Absolutely.
Yeah,
exactly. It's all relative, right? I'm glad you said that. In their world, it's extremely important.
Yeah.
In your world, it's obviously important what you're doing.
Sure.
Like it's all perspective in this sense, of course.
And so I at the beginning of this year, I told him, I said, you know what, I'm going to have a number 2. And at the beginning of the class, I'm going to put my phone in there, and we're all going to be phoneless for the whole period. And I think even if they don't have that full perspective, I think they recognize honesty and truth, kids, when it's professed. And I was being a hypocrite before, and I think this year it's helped a little bit. They're much more likely to get up and put it in there right away without me having to ask, because they see mine in there and they're like, okay, if he can do it, we can all do it, and that's helped for sure. And so it's just another one of those examples where it's kind of like, don't think that you can fool yourself and ask other people to do things for you that you're not willing to do.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you recognized that, because I think, it would have been easy, just as you had gone into the conversations thinking that, you were right maybe only.
Yeah.
I think, in a lot of people's minds, you're like, well, I'm a teacher. They're a student. Yeah. I have to check things for work, potentially, so I need this. And they're not willing to bend. But, again, you looked back, you looked upon yourself, and you're like, this is how it may be perceived from them. Probably more than likely, I can guarantee it. I would say you made the right call, and there's probably nothing that important that's going to come up with, hopefully, within those 45 minutes that you can't do without as well, if that's especially what you're requiring of them.
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, if there's an emergency, then someone's probably going to come to my room. Or call my room phone.
Yeah, that's the same. That's the same thing I always say about work. Like, I don't know. I'm leading into a joke, but I always I'm going to ignore my emails. If it's really important, they'll just come find me or something. So I'll just ignore my emails for the rest of the week or the day. So I don't want to. I'm probably coming. I hope I'm not coming off in the wrong way. I feel like I've said I've really realized this about myself and this about myself, and man, I'm doing a great job. And so now I hope my job is to be like, well, what am I doing now that I haven't even realized is probably exactly. It's so consistent. It's a never-ending crescendo of self-analysis, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And for the 100th time, I will gladly say, if on the last day of my life, if I learn something new, or if I'm just a little bit better than the day I was before, then so be it. Because I think, to me, this may be hard for somebody to subscribe to, but for me, it's even sadder subscribing to the notion that I couldn't become a little bit better each and every day than the last, or I couldn't learn another thing. I mean, God, I'm 30 years old. If I don't learn another thing, or if I don't become a little bit of a better person for the rest of my life at this point, that's incredibly sad to me. Like,
Right.
So even just thinking about that now, as I say this to you, I'm going to carry that close to me and continue that when I go to work tomorrow, or when I go to the gym tomorrow, or when I converse with my family, my wife or my friends or whoever.
Yeah.
I think you need to do that. And I think when one subscribes to that themselves, when you're having these conversations with yourself, you inevitably have them now with me or with your family or with your friends, and it just grows. And again, another point that comes up organically about this a podcast is for us to have these conversations, and now hopefully somebody that's listening to this would be like, well, I see that in myself, or maybe I've been very rigid in this conversation with my spouse or with my coworker or with my boss, and they're like, well, maybe I should see it, the classic saying, the cliche saying of see it from their shoes. But
Sure.
as cliche it's cliche again for a reason, and you don't really just want to brush it to the wayside, and that's something that's very important, and we've essentially described here is not thinking that you're right no matter what. So I would hope that people, like I said, listening or watching would take that away from this as well.
Yeah, and something that you brought, that you hit on, that I think is important or should be said, is that another thing that I've started to realize is that as you become feel more right about things all the time, you're kind of pushing people away, in the sense that I realized at one point, in the last few years, that I didn't have a lot of people in my life that were even willing to kind of point out things that I was probably doing wrong, or and so it's like you need those people, because you, as much as you try to be honest with yourself, you need someone who you respect enough who can come up to you and say, hey, you kind of screwed up there.
Absolutely.
And I have a couple in my life, thank goodness, and I'm trying to find a few more. And you're never going to have 100 of them.
Yeah, but that's a great point. I mean, if you're very, like you said, hard-headed, and you maybe people are scared to be like, hey, Jordan, like, sure, you messed up here, or maybe you should look at this from another point of view. But if you're always like in people's faces about like, I'm right no matter what, and I'm never going to bend, it would be, or you'd be less approachable, right? So I'm glad that's a phenomenal point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's just I realized how valuable it is to have someone, and I don't know if mentor is really the right word. I just think it's someone who's close to you in whatever capacity that might be.
Sure.
Where your relationship is solid enough,
honesty,
and you trust each other enough to to just be honest. Yeah, just
be honest with each other. And I think something that comes to mind is in a relationship. So I mean, I've been married a few years now, and it's definitely not, as you described, sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
One thing I always say to her, and she says to me, is to just be like, I mean, you said honest, but I just think on a deeply emotional level with the spouse, at least for me, I can think that I never ever want to be unapproachable by her.
Right.
Because a lot of times, and especially I would say that when you're having a heated conversation, or argument with your spouse, they're extremely emotionally charged for the most part, regardless of what age you are in a relationship. I think they can be. One thing I tried to practice to do, I'm not saying like I'm using my conversations with my wife or my disgruntledness with my wife as practice, but I try to actively in the present moment catch myself that I'm being too emotionally charged, too hard-headed, not willing to hear her. It's one thing that I've thought of myself, and one thing, luckily, she's honest enough with me to tell me when I'm messing up on something, or when I'm not hearing it from her point of view. And maybe in that moment it's really hard, because I said it can be so emotionally charged, like you had emotion coming into your conversation with these parents. But in the moment, it's good to be able to catch yourself, and you may not be able to fully apply it in the moment, but I think, like, for me, at least after the fact, you want to like take away, almost analyze, and like, well, what happened? Like, why did that argument come into fruition? Or why did they, that meeting coming to fruition with you guys, and the facts were the facts there. That was easy, but sometimes it's not as easy with emotionally charged relationship arguments. But you want to come back and you want to review the plays and be like, well, shit. Well, maybe I was wrong and here, or maybe I was wrong there, and it may or may not be a good idea to go back and revisit that with your spouse, or whoever whoever in this scenario. But I know for me personally, what works is to current, present self-analyzation, and then post-analyzation of myself as well. Like you've brought up many times, of being able to self-reflect and figure out maybe what you could have done better. And I think that's very important for these relationships as well.
Right. Well, and I can't speak to the husband and wife relationship or even a serious dating relationship, because I don't have either of those at the moment.
Well, but I think it can be a friend relationship, or a parent, or you have a sister, of course. You get into conversations like that as well. So I mean, I hope anybody that's listening, I'm glad you bring that up. Like I don't specifically mean my wife, and it's your husband and your wife, or your boyfriend or your girlfriend. It could be any human interaction, essentially. Right.
And I think when you are married, to me. And maybe it could be argued once you have kids, it changes a little bit. But to me, that is the husband and wife relationship is the most important relationship that has to be worked on and cultivated. And I'm kind of angling on a tangent a little bit, but I really like what you said, because once again, this is not an original thought. Some of my thoughts, quite a few of my thoughts, reflect back on that book that I was telling you about, written by the psychologist, called 12 Rules for Life, and like you said, you'll link it in the description. But he talks about how it's easy, and I'm just assuming this is true, and you can confirm or deny it, but it's easy to, if Jordan is annoying you in some way, but it's not that big of a deal, it's easy to kind of ignore it and say, let's not address that. But he says, no, you should address it. You need to address it with an open mind. You need to be willing to listen to her when you address it. But if you let it manifest longer and longer and longer,
absolutely,
you're probably going to take your anger out in another way, and she's not even going to know what the heck you're doing.
Yeah.
I think that applies to all relationships.
Absolutely. It definitely applies to relationship with your spouse, but like I said, all human interaction whatsoever. Yeah. I mean, how many times did maybe you had a friend, this is literally a random instance, or is it maybe I'm like pulling something deep-seated, but you had a friend that like chewed with his mouth open even when you were a kid. Yes, actually, right. I'm not going to say who it was, but I had a friend that would chew with their mouth open. This is exactly where this is coming from, and it's like not a big deal, but it goes on for weeks and months, and then like one day you're like, what the you throw some remark out there, and you're like, why the F are you why are you doing this, and they're like, what are you even talking about? But if you would have been like, hey, maybe you're not like this, but maybe your parents didn't teach you this, but maybe I don't know. It's a silly nostalgic example for me, but I'm reiterating the fact it could be as simple as something like that annoys you on a minute level. But I think if you have an ongoing, deeply rooted relationship with somebody, no matter what relationship that is, if you do not bring it to the surface early, and you let it build, and I think people may have heard similar variations of this before, but if you let it build, then it's gonna be much, much worse. The pressure builds, and then it's not good. Yeah,
no, I agree 100%, and I think I think that's where it is uncomfortable, and it does hurt sometimes to be just honest and in the present, but man, I think it manifests in such a much better way later on, because as long as you, like you said, I know there's a lot of emotion involved in some things, and as long as you can kind of check some of that emotion and try to see things from both people's side, or however many people are talking or fleshing things out, it can really kind of get in a much better way later on. So
yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to know, and I know we kind of spoke about it when we were hiking and we had dinner together, which was really fun to have you there. It was, just like all the times we were hanging out with the family. It was really good. But as a teacher, you brought it up a little bit already. You have these students and you see them making the same mistakes as you go. Or how long have you been teaching?
This is my. gosh, so I student taught in this same district in 2012, the fall of 2012,
Okay.
and then I've been there ever since. But I took a year off to get my master's degree in exercise physiology. So this is technically my 5th year full time, but
Yeah.
kind of.
So
kind of
you've
6
definitely been
years in
around it,
district.
is what I'm getting to, and what I'm leading into
Yes.
is kind of like, what have you seen repeatedly come up in the school that, I mean, you already said that kind of bothered you, but maybe things that, so, and there's a couple parts of this question, so please bear with me, and,
Okay.
and people that are listening, bear with me here, but maybe what do you see, maybe common things that are disgruntling you as a teacher within your students that maybe aren't solely applicable to your students, but maybe the mass, like people generally speaking, like in the world, maybe you see it occur a lot here, but maybe, it's a school, so these people are going off to college and going into the
Sure.
workforce, so they're carrying these maybe bad habits or things that are negative with you. And I think one of the things a huge thing you already touched on was they're taking the path of least resistance. So maybe is this the example that I need here, is they're, because they have so little resistance, for the most part, or maybe in comparison to other generations, or however you want to quantify it.
Yeah.
Is this affecting people later in life, that when they're coming in, like I said, into college, when they're coming into the workforce?
Right. Well, yes. I know I'm going to expound upon that.
Exactly. Yeah. I know I said a few things, but hopefully, yeah.
No. I do feel passionate about this, and I want to be careful not to be too political or make things political as much as possible. But I will speak to this, and like you said, the path of least resistance is, I think, hurting us. And I don't know if I'm even old enough to say this, like, well, back in my day, because it seems like every generation says that. When we were kids, we did this.
It's always like that, no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are.
I'm not 100% convinced of some of that. I think nostalgia is very powerful, and it can kind of rewrite what really happened sometimes.
Sure, absolutely.
But what I do know is this, that I recently stumbled upon a letter that was written in the paper of, like, it was like Stanford's student, I don't even know if it was their student paper, it might have been their alumni paper or something like that. It was written by a dean at the University of Stanford. And basically what she was saying is that helicopter parenting is ruining the future generations. And her point was that, Stanford obviously admits to the university some of the most brilliant minds in the whole world.
Yeah.
And she said that hasn't changed. Their SAT scores are still through the roof, and their transcripts are still impressive as hell. But what has changed is that when they get to school, they don't know what the hell's going on, because they're failing at things that they've never failed at before, and they have absolutely no clue how to respond. They can't, they can't pay a bill on their own.
Yeah.
They can't approach a professor about an issue because their parents always did it for them. And these things are, this is coming from a dean at Stanford who says, these brilliant kids are really rendered useless almost, because it doesn't matter how smart you are. It's the interaction that you can have with people in almost every sense that are going to allow you success or allow you failure. And the fact that they never have failed before is really...
Yeah, and then God forbid they actually do fail, then how the hell are they going to deal with it?
Right.
It's a scary thought for me to think, and I absolutely agree with you that it's how you deal with people. I mean, you can be as smart as you can be, but if you can't deal with people, one must work with people, and one must be able to articulate themselves and be able to speak with others and get along with others. And the fact that I'm hearing from you through him that people aren't having these basic skills, paying bills, scares me. And it reminds me back to about 10 or so conversations ago. I spoke with a gentleman who was a college professor, and I kind of asked him, what he thought of the education system. And of course, none of this stuff is taught in the education system, obviously, because it's an issue. But a lot of it, I think, is the responsibility of a parent. I think maybe some things could be taught more in the education system, but a lot of things, I think, stem from the parent as well. But I do think maybe, and again, I've been out of school for quite a long time, but maybe there's a lot more focus on the academics. And I understand, at a more funneled area. If you're going for a major for something, you want to focus on this, right? However, there's still a lot of other things you need to do, surprisingly.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is that I think growing up through any level of school, K through 12, there should be more emphasis on basic life skills. And again, I've been out of the game. I haven't been in school for 10 years. I don't really talk to people like you as often as I'd like to. That's probably one thing I wish I could do more. And I asked the same guy, like, I don't know how we fix that. It's really hard to fix that on a mass, at least countrywide scale for us here in America. But I think that's a really tough answer. There's probably not an easy answer. There's definitely not a quicker fix, nor should there be.
No.
But I think there needs to be some sort of perhaps implementation that starts so our kids aren't absolutely clueless when they're getting out into the quote unquote real world. Yeah.
And like I said, I try to caution myself a little bit to think that, like this is the end of our society because these morons can't even, they can't do anything without mom.
I'm sure the previous generation has thought about that as well, like you said, but it's as a societal thing. You also see society's historic. You talked about loving history. I mean, society's historically speaking, when the path of least resistance became more prevalent, it was kind of like whoop, they just fall off the map, and there's plenty of examples like that.
Yep, and I think the thing that scares me, and K-12 definitely needs to step their game up, and I agree with you. I don't mean academically. I mean just personally, responsibility, because I think we can all, if we think back, for those of us that went to college, we think back to certain things that we were expected to know out of high school. We didn't know that shit.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we learned it again. And so I'm not sure, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that academics aren't valuable in high school. They are. But we're gonna forget some of that, and we're gonna have to learn it again when we get to college. And so I think college is more the place to really, like you said, bear down through a major. I mean, if you're going to be a nuclear physicist,
refine it. Yeah.
I hope that you're going to study a lot of nuclear physics in college. But, once you are a nuclear physicist, do you know how to take care of yourself? Do you know how to take care of a family? Do you know how to run a business? There's so many.
I think the answer more than likely leads to no. And I get not so much anymore, but my wife, Jordan, not you, Jordan.
Right.
For anybody that's listening, my wife, Jordan. She was in property management, and she was dealing with a lot of people that were very bright. Were very, very bright individuals, had very great careers, but when they went to go take care of themselves and their personal lives, I've heard a multitude of treacherous stories of just terrible looking, apartments, and just they didn't know how to speak with her, and they're just absolutely terrible to her. And I think that speaks directly towards that. They're fantastic as a doctor, fantastic as a fill in the blank, but they just they don't know how to have basic interactions with a human being, nor take care of themselves, nor pay their rent on time, and can't comprehend why they're getting a late fee because their rent's not on time. Like, these are basic things. So you talk about dealing with people on a quote unquote normal level, being able to articulate yourself and have these basic interactions, but people can't comprehend why they're getting a late fee for having when their rent's not on time. And it's just the things like that, they scare me, quite frankly.
Well,
it's scary.
It's true. And I think where K-12 has failed in some senses in that way, then if you step up to the next level at the university, and this is where I said I want to try to be as apolitical as possible, but I truly believe that the societal culture on university campuses right now is scary, because they're trying to create a place where no one gets offended, where that's like, the rule of law, where you can't offend somebody. And I'm sorry, this is an offensive world. And you have to learn to deal with that. And this like safe spaces and all this stuff, I have a hard time comprehending what that's really allowing us to better ourselves. Because like we've talked about, the whole theme of this has essentially been, struggle a little bit, because you're going to learn something.
Exactly.
And if that means someone calls you a bad name, you know what? That sucks. But they don't run your life. You do.
Absolutely. So, I was about to say, you run your life, you make the decisions for you, and you need to be able to block out that noise, and you need to be able to focus on you need to be able to focus on yourself. And it can be hard, and I get it. Words hurt, that whole thing, but ultimately, sure, those people don't dictate necessarily and hopefully what's going on in your life for the most part. I'm sure there's, again, somebody's gonna be like, well, what if? Well, of course there's some examples, but yes, I do firmly believe that you need to focus on yourself, and you need to block out the haters.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's the truth. I mean, I think that needs to be the message. It's like, okay, life is tough. In fact, I think life can really be defined by the fact that life is suffering. I mean, you can't explain the tragedies that happen. There are so many things that are unexplainable that if you let them bring you down, you'll be down forever.
Yeah.
And so what gives you meaning in life? I don't know for sure, but at least in my life, it's not wallowing in the people that have wronged me or that I perceived have wronged me. It's kind of like, well, sorry, buddy. Apparently you and I aren't on the same team, but I better find someone who is on my team.
Yeah. And you speak of what gives you meaning, and a huge part of this, I always speak about passion. Well, finding things that you're passionate about and then accomplishing them. Not, if you're not seeking the path of least resistance, and you're going through these hardships and you're working hard and you're whatever, I speak about entrepreneurship and small business and doing what you want. And it's not always easy. Like, I'm trying to do all of these things myself outside of my actual day job. And it's fucking hard. It's really hard, and I get frustrated. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing it the right thing for the right reasons? Am I allocating my time well? Am I, spending enough time with my family? And it's freaking hard. It's really hard, and you get to wonder all of these things. However, the point I'm trying to make is all these crazy things that are always going on in my head. This is not the path of least resistance. This is a very difficult path, and I've talked about it before. It's this stress that I intentionally interject into my life. And I've called it good stress humorously before, but it's stress nonetheless. However, I 100% subscribe to this stress. I'd rather have it in my life, because I know it sucks when I'm going through it. It sucks right now, but I am almost fearful of if I don't force this stress into my life of what could be the outcome if I don't do that now, because I already am so cognizant of the fact that if I pleasantly walk down this path without resistance, that what could become of me. But because now, so I've learned that, speaking about learning things in the past and then applying them to the future. So that's one thing I've been super cognizant of walking an easy life, walking an easy walk. And now I understand that. So when I start to slip a little bit, I definitely try to implement that in my life. And it's when you talk about, when I ask you about school and all that, and you talk about, you see this, it's prevalent. It like I said, it scares me, and then it tries to reassure it in myself. And now, my family's growing, so I want to make sure, I'm bringing a child into this world. I know that they're going to be around other people, other kids that are maybe having having that path of least resistance, and I want to at least articulate to her so she can make those decisions herself. Because again, I haven't been a parent before, but I'd like to think that, there's certain things where you're not necessarily a friend. You want to be a parent. You want to teach them, but you also want to give them, this is A, B, C, D, E, F, through Z. This is the world. These are the options, and teach them how to make decisions, not force them to make decisions. And I think that's a lot of where this comes is teaching people why, and then teaching them that the path of resistance is not a bad thing.
Right. Well, and our society, something that you said kind of sparked another idea in my mind that is similar to this, but kind of veering off a little bit. But our society right now teaches that agreement and love are the same thing, right? And that's just not true. I don't have to agree with everything you do and everything you say and every choice you make to love you. And that, I think that is part of the essence of parenting. I think back to the way that my parents raised me, and there were so many things that I did that my parents were like, oh my gosh, that was really dumb. We don't agree with that at all. You're in trouble. Yeah. And
all the time.
I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? They don't love me. And that was a 12-year-old thinking, or a 15-year-old. And so yeah, you're going to have to do some things to your kid that they're not going to like very much. That doesn't mean you don't love them, though. They don't have the cognitive structure yet to understand that perspective, but that's how they learn it, is by you modeling those behaviors and those understandings.
Absolutely. Man, that is a plethora of good things that you've brought up. I'm sure this could easily, I'd love to have you on again. I'm sure this could go on another hour, another 2 hours. But I'm going to save it for a later time, and I'd love to have you again, man. I don't want to eat up any more of your time, but I've had an absolutely amazing conversation with you, and I'm really thankful for the time that you've given me and everybody that's listening.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much, Chris. And like you said, it's we could go on for a long time, and I hope that our recent reconnection in Colorado this summer and this conversation will allow us to continue to talk, not just on the podcast, but everywhere, because like we said, relationships are what it's all about. And man, we've had a lot of good times in the last 20 plus years, and so I don't want those to end.
Yeah, you definitely want to keep people in your life that share the same and similar visions as you, and like you said, that continue to push you, but also call you out for the things that may not be good or may not be right, or that you can work on, I guess, right? So, absolutely, man. I'm very excited that you were here, that you spoke with me, and you shared some about your life and some things you subscribe to, and that you think we can change, as a society, and that we can work on it. And I hope people take a lot of things away from that, because I know I have. So thank you so much for spending some time with me.
No problem. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait for the next one.
All right, Jordan. We'll see you later.
See you.